There is something extraordinary about people who grew up during the 1970s. When you talk to them, when you observe how they navigate the world, you notice a subtle but unmistakable difference. It's not just nostalgia or superficial cultural preferences. It's something deeper, something rooted in the very structure of how their brains were shaped, how their personalities were formed. This is the story of a unique generation, forged in a specific moment of human history that will never be repeated. Imagine a 6-year-old child in 1975. She wakes up on a Saturday morning, has breakfast, and her mother simply says, "Go out and play and come back when it gets dark." There's no cell phone in this child's pocket. There's no GPS tracking. There are no video calls to check if everything is okay. This child walks out the door and spends the day in the world, 10, 12 hours, and this is completely normal. She wanders the neighborhood, explores vacant lots, climbs trees, crosses streams, invents games with other equally free children. And in this wild freedom, something profound is happening in her brain. Neuroscientists today tell us that childhood experiences literally sculpt neural architecture. Each experience creates connections, strengthens pathways, shapes how the brain will process information for the rest of life. Children of the 70s were constantly solving real problems without adult supervision. How to get home when you got lost. How to make peace with a friend after a fight. How to assess if that branch will hold your weight. Each of these experiences was a lesson in autonomy, in trusting yourself, in understanding that you are the primary agent of your own life. Compare this with children of later generations, who grew up with parents always present, always mediating, always protecting. I'm not saying one approach is necessarily better than the other, but I am saying they produce fundamentally different psychologies. Children of the 70s developed what psychologists call a strongly rooted internal locus of control. They learned viscerally that their actions have direct consequences, that they are responsible for solving their own problems, that no one will come to save them if they don't try to save themselves first. And there was also the matter of time. Time moved differently in the 70s. If you wanted to watch your favorite TV show, you had to be sitting in front of it at the exact moment it was broadcast. There was no recording, no streaming, no pause. If you missed it, it was gone. You had to wait a whole week for the next episode. If you wanted a toy, you had to wait until your birthday or Christmas. There were no online purchases arriving in 2 days. These constant waits, this inability to have everything instantly, were training brains for something that has become extremely rare: the ability to delay gratification. There's a famous experiment called the marshmallow test, where children who can wait to eat a candy tend to have better life outcomes in virtually all metrics. Children of the 70s were essentially doing the marshmallow test every day, multiple times a day, without realizing it. They were developing psychological muscles of patience and frustration tolerance that would become increasingly rare in subsequent generations. If you're listening to this now and something inside you resonates with these words, leave a comment saying what time it is where you are right now. And if this journey through the mysteries of the human mind makes sense to you, subscribe, because there's still much more to explore. But let's return to those children with greater freedom of movement. There was another crucial psychological aspect to their experiences. They were constantly in their bodies, in the physical world. They ran, jumped, climbed, fell, got hurt and healed. Each physical experience was also a psychological lesson. When you fall from a tree and get hurt, you don't just learn about physics and gravity. You learn about limits, about recovery, about the fact that difficult things happen and you survive them. This deep connection between body and mind, this sensation of being an embodied creature navigating a real physical world, created a type of consciousness that is difficult to develop when much of your life happens through screens. Children of the 70s had what we might call deeply integrated embodied cognition. They thought with their bodies as much as with their minds. And then there was boredom. So much boredom. Hours and hours of absolute boredom. No device to check, no infinite content feed, no notifications constantly arriving. Just you and your own thoughts. And in that boredom, something magical happened. The mind began to wander, to imagine, to create its own entertainments. Children of the 70s developed rich inner lives because they had to develop them. There was no alternative. Modern neuroscience is discovering that boredom is not just absence of stimulation, but a specific mental state that is crucial for creativity, for emotional processing, for memory consolidation, for the development of sense of self. Children of the 70s had massive quantities of this precious resource, and it shaped who they became. Think also about friendships. When you wanted to see your friend, you had to physically go to their house. You knocked on the door, waited to see if they were home, if they could come out to play. Friendships were intensely physical, face-to-face. You knew your friend's house, knew their parents, knew their siblings. There wasn't a curated and edited version of your friend that they presented online. You knew the real, complete, messy version. And conflicts? When you fought with your best friend, you couldn't simply block them and move on. You had to make peace if you wanted to keep playing together. You had to develop real conflict resolution skills, forgiveness, relationship repair. These experiences created adults with sophisticated interpersonal capacities, people who understand that relationships require work, that conflict doesn't mean the end, that you can deeply disagree with someone and still maintain connection. There were also other aspects of this experience, of course. The 70s weren't a paradise. Many children grew up in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, especially for boys. There was a strong cultural message that feelings were weakness, that you should swallow your emotions and move on. This created many adults, especially men, who struggle with emotional illiteracy, who have difficulty naming or processing their own feelings. Children of the 70s also grew up during the Cold War. They did preparedness drills in schools. They absorbed awareness of global uncertainties. This created a kind of background existential consciousness, but also, curiously, a certain pragmatism about life. When there is uncertainty, there is an imperative to live in the present, to not indefinitely postpone life waiting for perfect conditions. Music occupied a special place in that generation's psychology. You had to go to a physical store, choose a record, spend your carefully saved money, take it home, care for it. Playing music was an intentional, physical act. You sat down and really listened, studied the cover art, read the lyrics. This deep and invested relationship with music created powerful neural connections. For many who grew up in the 70s, hearing a song from that era can instantly transport them back, not just in memory but in visceral emotional sensation. And books. Without competition from digital devices, books were primary portals to other worlds. Children read voraciously, not for points or school requirements, but because it was the most accessible way to escape, explore, imagine. Reading develops empathy in unique ways, because you are literally in another person's head, experiencing their thoughts intimately. Children of the 70s who were readers developed sophisticated capacities to understand perspectives different from their own. Food in the 70s also had its psychological peculiarities. You ate what was on your plate. There were no alternative meals prepared for picky children. The family gathered for dinner, turned off the television, talked. This was daily practice in social skills, in storytelling, in being seen and heard. There was simplicity in this that eliminated much anxiety. Fewer choices paradoxically meant less stress. As these children of the 70s grew up and became adults, they brought these unique psychological characteristics with them. In the workplace, they were often seen as independent, capable of working without constant supervision, comfortable doing their own thing. They could concentrate deeply because they had developed attention capacities before the era of digital distraction. But they also struggled sometimes. The world was changing rapidly. New paradigms that valued emotional vulnerability and constant collaboration sometimes conflicted with their upbringing. Many had to deliberately unlearn childhood patterns about repressing emotions. As parents, they found themselves in complicated territory. They remembered the freedom of their own childhoods with nostalgia, but lived in a world with different challenges, where giving children that same freedom seemed more complex. Many struggled with the tension between wanting to give their children the formative experiences they had and feeling they had to protect and supervise in ways their own parents never did. This generation's relationship with technology is fascinating. They remember a world without it, so they never take it completely for granted. They appreciated email and cell phones because they remembered the frustration of trying to coordinate without them. But they also sometimes missed the simplicity of the pre-digital world. They developed what we might call bi-technological fluency, comfortable with technology but maintaining some independence from it. What really distinguishes those who grew up in the 70s is this unique position between worlds. They were the last generation to experience a truly analog childhood, but lived long enough to become fluent in the digital world. They were raised in rigid structures but matured in an era of rapid social change. They experienced information scarcity in their youth but live in an era of overwhelming abundance. This position between worlds created remarkable psychological adaptability. It created people who can appreciate both silence and stimulation, both solitude and connection, both tradition and change. People with depth of experience and breadth of perspective that comes from living through fundamental transformation. There are valuable lessons in this generation's psychology. The capacity to tolerate uncertainty and discomfort, the valuing of genuine face-to-face connection, the appreciation of slow processes, the importance of freedom in child development, the resilience that comes from solving your own problems, the creativity that flourishes in boredom, the depth that comes from living in the physical world. But there are also lessons about what not to replicate, the emotional repression that left so many struggling silently, the lack of supervision that was sometimes excessive, the rigid structures that suffocated individuality, the discomfort with vulnerability that prevented genuine intimacy. Those who grew up in the 70s carry within them a living archive of a way of being human that is disappearing. They remember how to find entertainment in their own imagination, how to navigate without GPS, how to make plans without being able to confirm by message, how to be present without documenting, how to be patient because there was no alternative. These memories aren't just nostalgia. They are evidence of human psychological capacities that remain relevant even when the conditions that created them have disappeared. They remind us that human beings are remarkably adaptable, that we can thrive under a wide variety of conditions, that the essence of what makes us human transcends the particularities of any era. As this generation ages, they become living bridges between eras, capable of translating between worlds that have become incomprehensible to each other. They can explain to their parents how to use a smartphone and to their children how people used to live without one. They carry in their psyches the capacity to understand multiple ways of being human. The psychology of those who grew up in the 70s is, ultimately, a story about human adaptation. About how young minds absorb their environment and are shaped by it in ways that remain for life. About resilience and fragility, strength and vulnerability, all coexisting in the same psyche. If you grew up in the 70s, you carry within yourself a unique set of experiences and psychological capacities. You know things about patience, productive boredom, physical connection that younger generations may never know in the same way. But you may also have emotional aspects that need attention, patterns that may need release, rigidities that may need flexibility. If you didn't grow up in the 70s but know people who did, perhaps now you better understand why they are the way they are. Why they can seem simultaneously independent and emotionally guarded. Why they value genuine face-to-face time so much. Why they can handle crisis calmly but struggle with emotional vulnerability. What makes these people different is this particular combination of freedom and structure, connection and isolation, resilience and repression that defined their formative decade. They are products of a unique moment when the old world still predominated but the new was already emerging. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: each generation is shaped in unique ways by the circumstances of its formation, but the essence of humanity, the capacity to love, suffer, grow, create meaning, remains constant through time. The specifics change, but the human search for connection, purpose, and understanding continues. May we learn from both the strengths and struggles of this generation. May we preserve what was valuable from that era while avoiding its mistakes. May we honor their experiences while creating something new. And may we recognize the dignity and complexity of each human life, shaped by its time but transcending it. May the Lord God bless those who carry these memories and capacities, and may He guide us all to learn from each other across generational differences, building bridges of understanding and compassion that unite us in our shared humanity.